Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shelley Spiegel-Coleman, and I'm honored to serve as the Strategic Advisor to Californians Together. We welcome each of you to the first in a series of 3 webinars to delve into the content of our most recent publication, The State of English Learners in California Public Schools. Next slide. As Californians Together, we aim to advocate and uplift the talents and gifts that English learners and their families bring to our classrooms, districts, and state. We do this work in coalition with 33 parent, professional, and civil rights organizations representing all the sectors of the education community. To bring together change in our education policy and practice, we identify such issues as equity, biliteracy, accountability, and the teacher workforce. When advocating, it's critical that we make visible the needs of English learners, not as a homogeneous group, but as newcomers, reclassified fluent proficient students, long-term English learners, or dual language learners. Having the right data to develop the rationale and create an urgency for action is behind much of the work that we've been able to accomplish, such as the State Seal of Biliteracy, the work on LTELs, and new accountability measures based upon the analysis of LCAPs. Today, we're going to share data that we hope you will use to look at the students in your classrooms, your schools, and your districts. We hope this might cause you to rethink and reimagine how best to meet the needs of the diverse English learner population. We are at a period where significant progress has been made in supporting students' home languages and expanding multilingualism. We can be bold, knowing that the research, California's policy, and the English Learner Roadmap, and the data we present today and in the subsequent webinars will help each of us to envision new pathways and practices that affirm the languages and cultures of our students. You can see from all of these diverse positions that we hold that we together could have a major impact on what's happening in our state for English learners. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the author of The State of English Learners, Manuel Buenrostro. He's the Director of Policy for Californians Together. Manuel has the responsibility of directing our policy work and has the unique talent of understanding how the right data is needed to make visible and actionable new policy and practice for California's multilingual learners. So take it away, Manuel.
Thank you, Shelley. And it's truly great to see all of the different roles in our education system that are in attendance today. I just want to remind people that you can download the report for free. We want to make sure that you're able to access the report. I encourage you, as you look at it, to look at the endnotes. That's really where you can get access to the links where you can get the data for your own counties, districts, and schools. And if you want to purchase a hard copy, those are also available on our webpage. So you have both of those options. You can download it for free, but you can also purchase a hard copy, and that really covers the cost of shipping and printing for these reports. And I am excited to be able to provide an overview of this report and then dig into some of the sections and data that we uncover in those sections. Now, the State of English Learners report is meant to paint a comprehensive picture about how our English learners are being served in California public schools. It is broken into 8 sections, with most sections summarizing key data that is publicly available that can allow you to know more about how English learners are doing in the state, how they're doing in your counties, and how you're doing in your districts and schools. The 8 sections of the report include, number 1, understanding our students, which dives into the demographics of English learners, including their rich language assets, their strengths, and also some of the challenges that we might see. Section 2 is focused on academic achievement, which covers key data around student academic outcomes. A lot of this data coming from our state assessments in math, English language arts, and science. Section number 3 covers expanding multilingualism, which focuses on attainment of the state seal of biliteracy and access to multilingual pathways, including access to dual language immersion programs. It really is about making sure that our students can grow with proficiency in English, but also grow in their home languages. Section 4 covers access to rigorous coursework and a well-rounded education. This is focused on the opportunity for English learners to succeed in rigorous courses across all subject areas and electives, and all electives and subject areas that can make up a well-rounded education that can really engage our students. Section 5 is around supporting the whole child, which looks at key data around school connectedness and mental health, including attendance data. And it really has a lot of focus on data that we were able to get from the California School Climate, Health, and Learning Surveys. Section 6 is around access to prepared educators, focusing on the need for bilingual certified educators and for all educators to be prepared to provide English language development for English learners across all content areas. Section 7 is focused on accountability, focused on the need for our accountability system to set ambitious goals for English learners and to also shine a light on their needs. And lastly, like in all of our Californians Together reports, we end with state and local recommendations for state leaders and local leaders to consider in Section 8. Of note is that in sections 2 through 6 of the report, we have goals for the state and districts to consider meeting by the year 2030. And also each section at the very beginning also calls out the English Learner Roadmap policy and specifically outlines which principles of the English Learner Roadmap each section is most closely aligned to. Now, for the purposes of today, because we only have 1 hour with you, we will focus on just 4 sections. We're going to start by talking about understanding our students. Then we're going to cover the goals around academic achievement and also the section on access to rigorous coursework. And we will end with state and local recommendations for all of us to reflect on. We are hoping to hone in on additional sections in the future webinars that we will be holding in 2025. Now, starting with section 1, understanding our students. This is really a foundational section, as it is important for us to know our students as individuals and to also understand their strengths and challenges. This section is most closely aligned with Principle 1 of the English Learner Roadmap policy, which is focused on assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, which cannot be created without knowing our students and really centering their needs and assets within how we shape our education system. So who are our English learners? And what does their experience look like when they first enroll in our public schools? Well, it all starts from the moment that a student is enrolled and they take the home language survey, which determines one simple question. Does this student speak an additional language other than English at home? So as a student is enrolled, if it is determined that the student speaks no additional language other than English, they move to the left, or the blue boxes in this graphic. And this student is classified as an English-only student, meaning that only English is spoken at home. If the student speaks an additional language other than English, they then take an initial English language proficiency assessment, otherwise known as the LPAC in California. And based on the results of the initial LPAC, a student might be determined to have enough English proficiency to successfully access the content areas without additional language supports. If it is determined that this student is initially fluent in English, then they would be classified as initially fluent English proficient. So they would be on the green side of this graphic, and they would be classified as an IFAP. If, on the other hand, it is determined that the student needs additional English language support to access the curriculum, then they are classified as an English learner. Eventually, it is our hope that all English learners can gain enough English proficiency for the system to change their status to reclassified fluent English proficient students, or RFEPs. So if you look at the right of this graphic, an English learner can eventually be reclassified as a reclassified fluent English proficient student or as an RFEP. So altogether, if we look at English only students, initially fluent English proficient students, English learners, and reclassified fluent English proficient students, that covers all of the students in our system. And it covers all of the language acquisition status that they might have. Now, looking at the very bottom of the table that you have in this slide, we see that across all grades, 2 in 5 students speak another language other than English at home. That is 40% of students that speak another language other than English at home across all grades. This includes 19% of all students who are English learners, 16% who are reclassified, and 5% who are initially fluent English proficient. It comes to no surprise that in the early grades, and in this table, the early grades are at the very top, and those are the grades kinder through 2nd grade, a higher proportion of students are English learners. That is 26% of students in grades kinder through 2nd grade are English learners. However, as we move up the grade spans, we see that the proportion of English learners drops and the proportion of students who are reclassified increases. Interestingly enough, we see that the proportion of students who speak a language other than English at home also increases as we move up the grade spans, going from 32% in grades kinder through 2nd grade, going all the way up to 45% in the high school grades of 9th to 12th grade. It is likely that this increase in the proportion of students that speak another language other than English at home might be due to our newcomer students that are enrolling in schools across the middle and high school grades, adding a rich array of assets, strengths, and language diversity to our schools. Speaking of language diversity, understanding the cultural and language assets of our students is an important aspect of meeting their needs and building on their strengths. Here we see the top languages spoken by English learners across the state, ranging from Spanish to Arabic to Mandarin to Punjabi. These common languages can vary by county, district, and school. So we encourage you to look at this language data in your own community to better understand your students' assets and strengths, and to also better understand the top languages that might be spoken in your school sites or your areas. Understanding the additional characteristics of English learners is also critical to meeting their needs. Here, I want to point out 2 important statistics to consider. The first is that a higher proportion of English learners, that is 84% of English learners, are socioeconomically disadvantaged when compared to only 51% of English-only students. This has important implications as we must understand that meeting the needs of English learners cannot just be about meeting their language needs, but it also means meeting their additional needs that they need to be prepared for school, such as making sure that they have meals in school, making sure that they have access to internet connectivity, and making sure that we consider any additional needs that our schools and our communities need to meet so that they're ready to learn and are ready to access the content. The second statistic to consider here is that while the proportion of English learners who are duly identified as students with disabilities is only slightly higher than that for English-only students, that is 17% of English learners are duly identified as students with disabilities, compared to 14% of English-only students. There does appear to be a significant number of duly identified English learners that the system has not been able to serve well. This is exemplified by the fact that nearly 1 in 3 long-term English learners are duly identified as students with disabilities. That is a significant proportion of long-term English learners. Now, for those of you that are hearing about long-term English learners for the first time, or it might be one of your first times, a long-term English learner is a student who has been an English learner for 6 or more years and has not made progress towards English proficiency for 2 or more of those years. That means, for 2 or more consecutive years. That means that the system has kept them stuck and has not been able to meet their needs. Again, 32% of long-term English learners are duly identified with disabilities, compared to 17% of all English learners. This again has important implications for how we ensure that we are addressing the specific needs of our English learners. We have to make sure that we consider whether we are meeting their disability needs of these students, and whether we are able to differentiate between their language and disability needs in both identifying these students and also in addressing them and identifying the supports that might be able to get them to access the content. Now we're going to move on to section 2, which is around academic achievement. This section is most closely aligned to principle 2 of the English Learner Roadmap policy, around focused on intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. And we start this conversation around academic achievement by first stating our aspirational goal that all English learners can make progress towards English proficiency and eventually be reclassified. It should be our goal for all students that are English learners to be making progress every year, and for all of them, by the time they graduate from high school, to eventually be able to gain that English proficiency and hopefully also be able to gain proficiency in their home language as well. The first goal that we set here in this section is that we would increase the proportion of ever English learners who are reclassified by 10 percentage points by the year 2030. Now, for the purposes of this conversation, an ever English learner is any student who is currently an English learner or was previously an English learner. So this includes both English learners and reclassified fluent English proficient students. We see from the data that we were able to get from the California Department of Education's DataQuest portal that in 2023, 69% of ever ELs in the high school grades, that is grades 9 to 12, had been reclassified. This unfortunately signals a 4 percentage point drop from 2021, where that proportion was 73%. In the middle school grades, that is grades 6 to 8, we see that 54% of ever ELs have been reclassified. This again is unfortunately a 6 percentage point drop from 2019, where it was 60% of ever ELs in the middle school grades that had been reclassified. Again, it is our hope that by the year 2030, 64% of ever ELs would be reclassified in grades 6 to 8, signaling a 10% increase, and 79% of ever ELs would be reclassified in grades 9 to 12, signaling another 10% increase. I must also point here that the ultimate goal for our English learners should not just be reclassification by itself, but reclassification alongside their continued achievement across English language arts, math, and all other subjects. Next, we focus on a goal that was set in our 2021 report, Renewing Our Promise, which focused again on long-term English learners. In that report, we set the goal that by the year 2030, we will reduce by half the proportion of English learners in grades 6 to 12 who are long-term English learners, and that we would also reduce by half the proportion of English learners in grades 3 to 5 who are at risk of becoming long-term English learners, therefore preventing more students from becoming LTELs. Unfortunately, since the report was released, we have seen an increase in the proportion of English learners who are long-term English learners in grades 6 to 12. This went up to 49% in the 2022-23 school year. And a similar increase was also seen in the proportion of English learners in the elementary grades who were labeled as at risk of becoming long-term English learners. These increases might have a lot to do with the impacts of the pandemic and have erased the progress that we had been making during the previous 5 years. But again, here we have an opportunity. Here we again want to reiterate the goals that by the year 2030, we would like to see that only 25% of English learners in grades 6 to 12 would be long-term English learners, and only 20% of English learners in grades 3 to 5 would be at risk of becoming long-term English learners. Now we are going to focus on academic achievement data for English learners around English language arts, and then we're going to focus on math. Now, this data is publicly available through the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, or CASP, or CAA SPP results page. In this slide, we can see the outcomes in English language arts, and in the figure that you see here, you can see the outcomes for English learners in blue, for reclassified fluent English proficient students in green, and for English-only students in yellow. First, you might notice that our schools prepared less than 10% of English learners to meet English language arts standards across all of the secondary grades in grade 7, 8, and 11th. The second thing that I want to call your attention to is a relatively high proportion of reclassified fluent English proficient students who met English language arts standards in grades 3 to 6. For example, 68% of fourth grade reclassified fluent English proficient students met or exceeded English language arts standards, compared to just 48% of English-only students. So it's something great to see that our reclassified students are outperforming and having higher proportion of students who are meeting standards compared to our English-only students in those grades. This also goes along well with something that we have heard from many of you working in schools and districts, and that is that reclassified fluent English proficient students are doing well in our system. However, I want to call your attention to grades 7th, 8th, and 11th. As you look at those secondary grades, you see that the advantage of reclassified fluent English proficient students that they had compared to English-only students drops. And this eventually turns into a 1 percentage point gap by grade 11. In this next slide, we can see the outcomes in math. Here you can see that in third grade, nearly 1 in 4 English learners, or 22%, are being prepared to meet math standards. However, there's a drastic drop for English learners, and actually for all students in their preparation to meet math standards as we move up the grade levels. This leads to 11th grade, where just 2% of English learners are being prepared to meet math standards by 11th grade. Here, I want to again show a similar trend with the achievement of reclassified fluent English proficient students to that of English-only students. Again, we see the story here of a higher proportion of reclassified fluent English proficient students that are being prepared to meet math standards compared to English-only students in the elementary grades. However, this advantage once again turns into a slight 1 percentage point achievement gap in grade 7 and a significant 6 percentage point achievement gap in grade 11, where in grade 11, you see that 25% of reclassified students were prepared to meet math standards compared to 31% of English-only students. In the report, if you're able to access it and look at it, you will also be able to see outcomes and trends over the years. So you're able to see trends over time from the 2014 to 2023 school year. And you can also look at the results for science. So there's a lot more data to dig into when you look at the report. But again, I just want to highlight the importance here of looking at the outcomes by grade level and not just looking at the outcomes over the aggregate of all grades. Now, this brings me to the last two goals that we have around the academic achievement section. And these last two goals focus on achievement in English language arts, math, and science. And that is that by the year 2030, we would hope that the proportion of English learners and reclassified fluent English proficient students who meet or exceed standards in ELA, math, and science will increase by 10 percentage points across each of the grade levels. For this goal, I again want to emphasize the importance of analyzing outcomes by grade and not just looking at the aggregate across all grades. For example, if we look at the aggregate outcomes across all grades, we might leave away thinking that reclassified fluent English proficient students are doing great. But by looking at the outcomes in each grade level separately, we can see a more nuanced story for reclassified fluent English proficient students. And in that story, we see that reclassified students are outperforming English-only students in the early grades, but might need additional support from the system in the secondary grades. The last goal here, which is goal number 5, is that we must ensure that outcomes for reclassified students in English language arts, math, and science must be at least on par or exceed that of English-only students across all grades. Again, this goal is being achieved across most of across the elementary grades, but it's something that we need to work on when we think about the middle school and high school grades. And this last goal is critical because, as you remember in our earlier goals around reclassification, and again, while reclassification of English learners is great and we want to make sure that we meet those goals, just meeting a reclassification goal is not enough. We're not able to also ensure that our reclassified students are able to access the content and achieve to the same high standards that we hold for all students. So now this brings us to an opportunity for you to reflect before moving on to the next section. Here, we reiterate the 5 goals for this section on academic achievement, and that is that by the year 2030, California public schools will, 1, increase the proportion of ever ELs who are reclassified by 10 percentage points. 2, reduce by half the percentage of English learners in grades 6 to 12 who are long-term English learners. 3, reduce by half the percentage of English learners who are at risk of becoming long-term English learners in grades 3 to 5. 4, improve the proportion of English learners and reclassified students who meet or exceed standards in English language arts, math, and science by 10 percentage points across each grade. And then lastly, goal number 5, ensuring that reclassified student achievement in English language arts, math, and science is at least on par with that of English-only students across each grade. It's great to see the comments in the chat. I see a lot of folks gravitating towards the goals around reclassified fluent English proficient achievement, making sure that we don't lose track of those students. There's also a few folks that are making comments about long-term English learners. And I really appreciate that there's at least one comment that I saw around making sure that we are engaging families around resources. I hope that you see these goals as thought pieces, that these are goals that you can take back to your districts, counties, and schools, and that you can use them to create your own local goals around what you hope to see around academic achievement for your students. And definitely, as you make these goals in your own local systems, you can make them more nuanced, you can make them more specific to what you see in your local communities. So now we are going to move on and focus on section 4. This section is focused on access to rigorous coursework and a well-rounded education. This section is again most closely aligned to Principle 2 of the English Learner Roadmap around intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. And it's also aligned to Principle 4, which is around alignment and articulation within and across the system. Now, one common metric that has been increasing, that we have seen increasing across California is that of high school graduation rates. And we have seen tremendous success in our system, increasing the proportion of students that are able to graduate from high school every year. However, as students graduate from high school, we want to make sure that they graduate prepared to succeed in UC and University of California and California State University level coursework, and that they're able to meet those entrance requirements for both the UC and CSU systems. In California, there are a series of courses that students must take in high school that can prepare them for UC and CSU level coursework. These are the A through G graduation requirements. In 2023, looking at the data around four-year cohorts and the proportion of four-year cohort students that are able to graduate and meet A through G requirements, we see that only 50% of non-English learner students in a four-year cohort graduated from high school meeting A through G requirements. For English learners, this proportion was significantly lower at 19%. This data can be accessed for your school, district, and county through the California Department of Education's DataQuest portal. Unfortunately, this four-year cohort data is not available for reclassified fluent English proficient students, which would be something useful to know, considering that more than half of our students who have ever been English learners in our system have been reclassified by 9th grade. Now, our goal here that we state in the report is that by the year 2030, 1 in 3 English learners will have graduated from high school, meeting A through G requirements. And if we're able to get the data for reclassified students, we're hoping to see that the proportion of reclassified fluent English proficient students are graduating, meeting A through G requirements at the same rate as that for English-only students. Again, we want to make sure that our students are graduated from high school, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at whether, as they're graduating from high school, that they were able to get access to A through G courses while they were enrolled in high school. Now we move on to data that is available through the California Schools Dashboard. And specifically, this data is available through the College and Career Indicator data. Here we look at the proportion of English learners that completed at least one college credit course with a passing grade. That means that they completed college credit courses. We also look at students that passed at least 2 AP exams with a score of 3 or better, or successfully completed a CTE pathway. Here we see that only 6% of English learners completed one college credit course, compared to 10% of all students. 2% of English learners passed at least 2 AP exams, compared to 15% of all students. And 9% of English learners completed a CTE pathway, compared to 15% of all students. Unfortunately, the dashboard data is not reported by reclassified fluent English proficient students, but we're hoping to be able to get this information for future reports. Again, here we state 2 additional goals to achieve by the year 2030. Number 1, we hope, or goal number 3, we hope that we can double the proportion of English learners that are completing college level coursework, AP exams, and CTE pathways by the year 2030. We also hope, in goal number 4, that we ensure that the proportion of reclassified fluent English proficient students completing these opportunities is on par to that of English-only students. And again, we hope that as you look at the data for your districts and counties on the dashboard, that you're able to dig into what this looks like for English learners. Now, the next goal that I want to dig into here does not have measurable yearly data, but we are stating it as an important opportunity to highlight in our schools. And that is our hope that by the year 2030, all English learners and reclassified fluent English proficient students will have the opportunity to take an ethnic studies course in high school. Now, what we know about the status of this goal is that according to a 2023 study, half of California public school students attended a high school offering ethnic studies during the 2020-21 school year. Moreover, we know that in the 2018-19 school year, only 0.2% of all students were enrolled in ethnic studies. Now, the opportunity here is that by the year 2020, California adopted the ethnic studies model curriculum guidelines. Moreover, AB 101 by Assemblymember Medina was signed by the governor in the year 2021, and this important legislation states that all school districts must offer a one-year ethnic studies course by the 2025-26 school year. And it also calls for an ethnic studies course to become a high school graduation requirement for the 2029-30 school year. Now, we strongly believe that ethnic studies implementation can be a strong part of implementation of the English Learner Roadmap policy, specifically as we see the alignment with Principle 1 of the English Learner Roadmap around assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools. We also hope that as you continue to implement ethnic studies courses in your districts and schools, that you continue to consider the needs of English learners and you consider access for multilingual learners as you consider to expand these opportunities within your high schools. Now, lastly, we go to goal number 6 in this section. And again, this goal doesn't have data that allows us to track it year by year. But again, it's another important opportunity to highlight for English learners and reclassified fluent English proficient students. And that is our hope and our goal, that all English learners and reclassified students will be able to participate in arts education from preschool all the way to 12th grade. This is another recognition that access to rigorous coursework and a well-rounded education is more than just about English language arts, math, and science, but it's also about all of the other subjects that can engage and prepare our students for the future. Arts education is also a way to build critical skills that can translate into students' future success and any career and life endeavor. It can build and nurture creativity, which can be an invaluable career skill in this ever-changing world. This opportunity is elevated by the passage of Proposition 28 in 2022, which allocates about $1 billion every year for the expansion of arts education opportunities in your school districts. We hope that as these funds are used and arts education is expanded in your own schools and districts, that you can again think about the access and opportunities to engage our English learners and multilingual learners across your systems. So this again brings us to another opportunity to reflect on the goals around access to rigorous coursework. Here, we again summarize the 6 goals for this section that we hope for the system to achieve by the year 2030. The first goal is again to make sure that 1 in 3 English learners can graduate from high school meeting A through G course requirements. Goal number 2 is around making sure that the proportion of reclassified fluent English proficient students that graduate from high school meeting A through G requirements is at least on par to that of English only students. Goal number 3 is around making sure that our California public schools double the proportion of English learners completing college level coursework, AP exams, and CTE pathways. Goal number 4 is making sure that around college level coursework, AP exams, and CTE pathways, that we also see reclassified students able to access these opportunities at the same rate as English only students. And then goal number 5 is around making sure that all students have the opportunity to take an ethnic studies course in high school. And lastly, goal number 6 is around making sure that all English learners and reclassified fluent English proficient students can participate in arts education all the way from preschool to 12th grade. A lot of comments around making sure that there's rigorous access to AP exams, CTE pathways, college level coursework. I also see some great comments about making sure that we're also addressing the needs of our newcomer students. Some comments around making sure that we're also addressing additional needs such as chronic absenteeism. Definitely encourage you to take a look at the other sections of the report that cover additional topics such as attendance and what chronic absenteeism is looking like for our English learners. Now, for the final section of the report, and again, this is something that as an organization focused on meeting and trying to address the needs of multilingual learners, we end the report with state and local recommendations. So what are the recommendations that we hope the system to be able to address for our English learners so that we can get closer to these goals by the year 2030? So in the report, there are 6 state recommendations. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm not going to cover all of them, but just to give you an example, the first recommendation here is for the state to set a clear statewide goals for English learner outcomes and to clearly track that progress. I also want to call out to goal number 3, which is around investing in the expansion of bilingual pathways and programs. And then again, goal number 4, which we see as another opportunity, is to continue the investments in community schools and initiatives that can support the whole child and address those holistic needs of our students. You're able to read these recommendations with more detail in the report and reflect on what might be possible to accomplish at the state level. And then lastly, we have local recommendations for you all to reflect on. For this, I'm going to give you an opportunity to reflect on these a little bit more and share with us which of these local recommendations you might want to prioritize within your own county, district, or school. So these local recommendations include making sure that we set goals for English learner outcomes, that we're able to track progress and invest adequate resources towards meeting those goals. Our second local recommendation is around expanding bilingual pathways that can lead to the state CO by literacy. The third local recommendation is around increasing access to rigorous coursework by investing in bilingual counselors to ensure that English learners and reclassified students enroll in these courses, and that they can also get the supports that they need in those courses to be successful. Goal number 4 is around centering English learners in community schools as you expand these opportunities in your districts. Goal number 5 is ensuring that there's integrated English language development, professional learning for all educators, so that educators across all of the content areas are able to provide the supports for English learners that might enroll in their classes. And then goal number 6 is around building local partnerships or regional partnerships to address the bilingual teacher pipeline in your own regions. So for this, we're going to give you a few minutes. Crystal has set up a slide where you're able to select your top 2 recommendations, and it'd be great to see what you all select as your top 2 recommendations that you might want to work on over the next 1 to 2 years. Thank you for those of you that responded. We see that there's a lot of attention to ensuring that we provide integrated English language development across all of the subject areas for our students. So we need to make sure that we do professional development and prepare our educators for that. Also appreciate the attention that was brought to the other goals. In an ideal world, we want to make sure that we try to address all of these goals over the next 1 to 2 years. And there might be a few additional opportunities that are not in these goals that we would love for you to consider as well. Again, these are thought pieces for you to take back to your districts and reflect, and maybe even develop your own local recommendations or your own actions for improvement.
So just to add on a few concluding thoughts, first of all, I want to thank Manuel for this excellent work that he's done in producing this important report that we think is going to have utility in so many spaces in our work for improving policy and practice for English learners. So thank you, Manuel. But we have some concluding thoughts about the work in general that we've done. And one is that we know that students are really individuals with multiple identities, strengths, and challenges. They're not just a number on an assessment score. And so as we share with you in the subsequent webinars, and you saw in this webinar too, we've looked at other areas, not just achievement test scores, for us to really look at what it is that we can do to expand our programs and our services and to really support the needs of English learners. The other thing is that challenges and gaps that we've identified in this report are deficits really of our system. They're not deficits of our students. Our students come to our schools in kindergarten. Their parents leave them at the doors, hoping that each of them becomes the best and brightest student possible and the most successful member of their family. And through the system, not providing the kinds of supports and the kind of diverse programs that are needed, we see that some students do well and others really need additional support. And so the deficits are really on us and not on the students. And lastly, our students continue to bring to school valuable strengths of their cultures and their languages, and that we must celebrate and find the proper form of for a basis of improvement of our public school system. And we hope that these improvements will happen both at the state level and at the local level with our leaders in both of those levels to build upon the legislative and policy achievements that we of Californians Together have been working on for the past 25 years with you as our partners. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Manuel. With that, I want to, with that, I think we're going to move on, Manuel. Go ahead.
So we're going to close it out by just sharing what's coming up next, additional opportunities for you to engage. Like Shelley mentioned, we're looking forward to doing additional webinars around other areas of this report in 2025. So we want to make sure that we cover the goals around expanding multilingualism. And then we also definitely want to cover supporting the whole child and what the data says, but also what else we can think about around that topic. There's also additional webinars coming up before we close out 2024. On the slide, we have the QR code that takes you to our webpage where you can get a list of all the upcoming webinars. Just to highlight a few opportunities, our English Learn or AO RISE team, which is helping coordinate, which is working with county offices of education to support implementation of the roadmap, has a series of webinars that you can access. The next one is October 9th, focused on secondary instruction for multilingual learners. We also have a great series of Cal New webinar series that focuses on newcomer students. There's one coming up October 10th. And then on October 22nd, we have a webinar that we are co-hosting with LMU Center for Equity for English Learners around elevating integrated English language development and mathematics for our students, where you're going to be able to learn from district leaders and teachers about how they're doing this work. Again, you can access all of these upcoming events on our webpage. We encourage you to take a look at that and share any opportunities that might seem interesting to you or to your colleagues. And then lastly, thank you again for being here, for taking time out of your busy schedules. And Shelley and I have our contact information up here. We're happy to answer any questions if you reach out to us, or to be a resource for you and your work. Thank you again, and let's keep doing this work together.